Hello, beautiful community. We're going to talk a little bit, and this time really not long, about the psychology and motivation of the Hamas attack. We won't get deep, we won't talk about things in psychoanalytic terms, we won't talk about the cultural and sociological bases of violence, we won't talk about the evolutionary bases of human aggression. We'll just say a little bit about the Hamas motivation, a little bit about the Hamas psychology. But to begin with, let's say a little bit about strategy, something I don't want to talk about much in this clip. The strategy is to undermine or bring forward the self-undermining of the project of Zionism, by which, for the basis of this talk, we can just say we mean the project of a state for the Jews, which might go well or badly as a project. And I'm saying that because I want to distinguish that from the survival of Israel as a state, because existentially, in that sense, Israel is not in danger. But the Zionist project as something that is perceived as successful and viable and hopeful by the world, well, that is in danger. And Hamas want that to implode and self-implode. Which means radicalizing Israelis. And Israelis are already feeling shock and outrage and revulsion. Radicalize Palestinians, radicalize actors in the Middle East, bring it about that the world perceives, in ethical terms, Israel as indistinguishable from Hamas after many civilian deaths that are forthcoming in Gaza. Now, of course, before we go on, it's worth saying that it's not a profound point of political philosophy to note that you don't get to do what Israel has done in Gaza and come out with excellent consequences. That's to say, Israel's policy in Gaza, where human conditions have been intolerable, and where Israel's conduct has been recognized by various international organizations as entailing gross human rights violations and crimes against humanity. Now, you don't get to do that and have constructive outcomes. That's to say, Gaza is a very classic example of something that's morally unacceptable as a policy, also being profoundly counterproductive for the author of the policy, for Israel. But let's talk Hamas. I think motivationally I see, we could put three things on the table that are interconnected: jihad, revenge, and martyrdom. So jihad will mean not just spreading a certain conception of Islam. And it's very important here to not start talking about religions being constitutively violent. And we'll have a separate conversation about the problems of speaking in such terms. But we're not just talking about a jihad that sort of spreads Islam. It's a jihad that's defensive too, because it's goes against a very big opponent, very big enemy that's occupying you. And for Hamas, the occupation isn't what humane people around the world might call the occupation, which is the post-1967 story. For Hamas, the existence of Israel constitutes occupation, really. There's different voices in Hamas, but really that we can say that, I think. Now, I don't want to impose views on you, but partly you're here for that. You're here for me to express views which you could refer to. But obviously my recommendation is to reject that understanding and to have a political concept of occupation. It needs to be a political concept of occupation because we need a concept of occupation that is constructive, right? It can't just be some kind of moral idea. And that just doesn't work as a political concept of occupation. Israel gets to be there, I'm sorry. So I strongly recommend, obviously, against the Hamas idea here. Now, revenge, then, against the Israelis, revenge for various things one knows may have suffered at the hands of the Israelis, and theatrical revenge. And so this is this business of becoming a martyr by taking revenge in a demonstrative and theatrical way. Almost like, wow, I'm going to be famous. In our more prosaic, in terms of our more prosaic equivalents of what kids here may aspire to. Now, when it comes to let's just take a little interlude, in fact, before we jump to the psychology of Hamas. And that's to say that Hamas is a terrorist organization, and it should be possible for you to say that, and saying that something is a terrorist organization is a condemnatory thing to say. And I won't give any kind of analysis of what is and what isn't terrorism here. But an essential feature of terrorism is an absolute obliteration, indeed a demonstrative obliteration, between that distinction have been put on the table very strongly between, I'm going to try to say these words better now, combatant and non-combatant. Now, so that's I think that's important, and I also think that helps Israelis who are critical of Israeli policy or critical of the radical anti-democratic Israeli government that Netanyahu has been running. It helps them if the evil of Hamas and the gross evil of Hamas's actions is acknowledged. I think that's an important political thing. I don't want to exclude from the conversation people like Yanis Varoufakis who say, yes, it's evil, but I don't want to start with that kind of emphasis. But what I'm saying is that I'm absolutely not Yanis here at all. I'm saying this is really evil. And now we come to something a bit deeper, which is the psychological story. And I think there are two elements that are worth understanding here. And this is really the deeper bit of the video and the least political and more explanatory bit of the video. One thing we've already talked about, which is this distinction of before and after. How can you be engaging in atrocities and think that this is a kind of pure forward step in spiritual and religious and moral terms? What must be going on through your head? And here we go back to our conversation about this distinction between before and after that is anyway present in politics, but is present in the most intensified form with fundamentalist violence. And here one says, well, I can do a bloodbath today, but tomorrow I can turn a new leaf. And if I turn that leaf, the bloodbath won't count anymore. We said last time that, I want to be your friend, but your friend is already Ricky, so I eat Ricky as a way of becoming your friend. But of course, it doesn't work like that, because you're going to know that I've eaten Ricky, and you're not going to want to have anything to do with me. Again, nobody's going to eat Ricky. So that's a very important dynamic to understand with this sort of violence. And I want to say a second point that I haven't been making recently, but it's really important understanding the kind of violence we saw from Hamas. And that is that violence, especially when it is as visceral as that, it's different if you are operating a drone from a distance. But violence, when it's as visceral as much of the violence we saw, is extraordinarily addictive as an end in itself. Because engaging in the violent taking of human life, so we're on YouTube, and of course we want to say that human life and human health are sacred, and we condemn all such grotesque acts. But in terms of analyzing it, what's so compelling for people, and this is real but frightening, is how real making the participation in such acts is. It makes people feel like they are coming into contact with ultimate reality. I mean, if you ask me, what do human beings want more than anything in the world? It's phenomenology. The biggest thirst humans have is the thirst for phenomenology, right? If we told you that you had 4 hours to live, and then we came back to you and said, come on, that's actually 40, so it's less horrendous, you would say, thank heavens, because you're so thirsty for phenomenology. And this kind of barbarism gives you a sense of not just phenomenology, but phenomenology in hyperdrive, like you've almost removed some kind of screen between you and reality. And it feels, as a result, ultimately compelling and kind of perversely life-affirming. And we've got to understand that danger with violence. In other words, the more violence goes on, the more violence becomes an end in itself, and the more it becomes detached from goals, like goals: who is right, who is wrong, who is fighting for what. With the perpetuation of visceral violence, you get the attraction to visceral violence as a thing in itself. That's an absolutely central psychological element of the kind of stuff we saw. I'm so sorry we've gone quite so heavy today, but we may do longer stuff. We'll be on the main channel with this stuff as well, and of course we're going to start bringing in the Russian-Ukraine story into our next conversations too. Lots of love. Talk soon.